I'm presenting some work that I've been doing with Will Payne, who's currently on a panel in the next room. So Will can't be here, so any errors or mistakes I have to take credit for. So I'm talking about, the title's a little too cutesy by half, but so it goes. So why 2024 won't be like 1984, historic maps as contemporary sources. And what we've been doing is looking at a series of historic maps. And I'm really going to focus on the one that this image is from today. And thinking about sort of how things like cartoon maps and hand-drawn maps and maps from sort of a pre-digital or sort of the kind of digital maps that we're looking at now might tell us something about the world and how we might use them. So I should begin by saying the map I'm mostly going to be working with today is this 1984 map, hence the 1984 joke, of Massachusetts, of the tech sector. And for those of you who don't really feel like playing Where's Waldo, that's where the Apple building from the logo came from the title, or beginning. Just to sort of a little bit of background on this map, and then we'll kind of dive into what we're really doing with it. This is part of a series of maps that were done by a company that's sort of selling tech sectors advertising maps. So you sort of say, hire us, we will hand draw these sort of cartoon maps and sort of tell everybody what a great tech sector you have. And we'll see some of those in a moment. One of the things that was interesting is they were hiring different designers and different illustrators. This one was actually done by Alice Bunny Carter, who I love, added herself as a business to the map itself, who I think went on to actually be a design professor in San Jose. As far as I know, this is the only one of the cartoon maps that she did, but I think she did an exceptional job. The San Francisco City Graphics of America company, is who was doing these. They did a whole series for Silicon Valley in the early 1980s. And you can find all of these on the Rumsey collection. And so there's a whole series of these, which are basically impossible to see on the screen, but I'll try to share in the Slack the actual links to the maps themselves. Again, sort of trying to sort of create a sense of place around technology using this, sort of, I think, very kind of clever cartography. There are, in theory, maps that are for both Orange County, which is also a big tech center in the 1980s, as well as Texas. I've never found those maps, so if anybody knows of like other cartoon map collections, I'd love to find them. But they're part of a sort of a series of really thinking about how cartoon maps and sort of hand-drawn maps and sort of illustrations that are cartographic but not necessarily really designed for sort of wayfinding and a lot of the things we do with data visualization today really help us tell stories about a place. So this is from a 1981 cover of the Datamation magazine, which is full of all sorts of great stuff. And they're really great because they contain all of the sort of rich place-based data that you wouldn't really see in a more kind of contemporary digital map. They're also kind of treasure maps and kind of mystery maps. And one of the things Will and I have been doing, and I'll talk about this in just a moment, is really sort of like trying to unpack like what was going on in this moment in the 1980s in Massachusetts. And so like, for example, you can just sort of see in this map in the bottom left corner there, this is really so the ascent of the Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, which often was just referred to as digital, which by the early 1980s was one of the largest computer manufacturers in the world, and certainly sort of driving a lot of the technological innovation in Massachusetts, and then famously sort of completely destroyed by the personal computer revolution and the rise of Silicon Valley. But at the moment, you can see there in the bottom left corner, DEC is actually replacing, I don't know if you can quite see it on this screen, RCA. Many of the major electronics corporations, like RCA, like Honeywell, had tried to have computer divisions and figured out it was actually quite hard to build computers, and were very quickly replaced by some of these other companies. So, these kind of moments of transformation, of sort of placemaking, of trying to create a sort of collective identity around technology in Massachusetts is sort of captured in these types of maps. And then, and sort of the association with things like Cambridge and MIT and Harvard and those kinds of things. Right, so what we're really sort of interested in is how we can look at historic maps, not just for like spatial data, but really kind of a sense of place. And, part of what's interesting about these is there's exclusions, there are omissions. They're very much sort of telling a particular kind of narrative about what's happening. And you sort of have to read between the lines to sort of find out what's going on. But this is really, again, about sort of a booming tech sector trying to portray itself as this great part of what's going on in Massachusetts. And there's all these other things happening at the same time that aren't necessarily represented on this map, but these sort of start to point us towards some of those questions. A couple of just sort of details. Again, I mean, it's hand-drawn, it's hand-lettered, these beautiful watercolor backgrounds. I spent a lot of time staring at this map going, God, how would I reproduce this in Mapbox, right? Like, what QGIS filter can I add, or, sort of, do I really have to go into Illustrator to make these kinds of things now, and do I even have the skills to do them? But also things like, for those of you who were at the PCD yesterday, Bitstream was one of the first kind of digital foundries, very infamously basically stole a bunch of other people's fonts and just started selling them as part of Corel. But just to say that part of what's interesting about this map is it captures a bunch of different types of industries that are part of one kind of place. And I think one of the things we do is we often imagine tech, especially from the present moment, as one thing. And you start to look at what's going on in Massachusetts in the 80s, and you go, oh, there's software companies, there's people doing text, there's people trying to commercialize Unix in funny ways, but there's also a bunch of hardware companies, there's people making computers, there's people making computer parts, there's people making cables, there's a bunch of chip fabrication facilities, right? So there's a whole kind of interesting intersecting sector and kind of agglomeration here. Again, this map, you can spend hours sort of playing Where's Waldo and being like, what's this, what's that? So what Will and I really want to do with this map, though, is try to understand how the kind of high water mark of this moment really actually cemented a particular type of landscape in the place that we're studying. And I think you could do this, again, like a parallel study in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, in parts of LA or Orange County, anywhere there's sort of like these tech bubbles. I think you could really do a similar type of study, but this is the one that I live near here, so I'm particularly interested in. But what we're interested in is sort of, very famously, if anybody's read Annalise Saxenian's book about this, it's sort of the case study in a tech sector just like going belly up, right? The sort of Silicon Valley ascends in the 90s and destroys Massachusetts along the 128 corridor, which you can just sort of see here. And we were kind of going, well, that seems true, but also what else happened? And what can we see in the landscape based on these types of maps? So really what we wanted to do is actually build a sort of new GIS and a new kind of cartographic representation of what's there today. And we're both very particularly interested in the buildings themselves and part of what's great about this map is that you have all of these hand-drawn versions of the buildings that were sort of new at that time or sort of relatively new. Again, the kind of things that are hard to visualize without getting some really interesting data today. So we're going to sort of use this to try to figure out what's still there, how's it being used. We're not as interested in the company history so much, but really sort of how that landscape has been cemented and how we might, go through and see what's going on now. I knew better, but I had to try. I was like, what if we just put it on and then just traced it? And that, of course, went, well, about as well as you'd expect. The roads kind of line up, but that bird's eye view doesn't really translate well into top down. So we did something much more old-fashioned, and Will gets absolute credit for this, which is just put a grid on it, and we broke it up into smaller sections, and we each took some of them and said, okay, I'm doing A1, you're doing A2, and we will basically go piece by piece through the map and write down every company that's there, and then try to figure out where the building is and what the address is, which has been a very slow, much slower than I would have thought process, in part because you'll see in a moment, there are too many towns in Massachusetts and none of them have centralized records. So we found a pretty good list of some of the kind of tech companies that were around, but really what we've been doing is we built just a very basic table. There's like another 75 columns, but this gives you kind of a sense of trying to input the addresses, finding out if the building still exists, what's in it, has it been remodeled, has it been torn down and something else been put up. We dealt with all of the sort of classic cartographic problems. Place names change, or like in official documents, places like Westboro or Marlborough will be spelled completely differently. So trying to get those place names into a table that you can then put into a contemporary GIS gets a little bit messy. Some of it was just like driving around and seeing if the buildings were still there. I got very hung up on these Honeywell stuff. Longer story that we don't have time for today. But the Honeywell building was their information systems division, went through old digitized records, found where the building was, went out and saw it. It's Boston Dynamics now. They're the nice people building the killer robots that you see on the internet sometimes. So the building's still there. It's been remodeled a bunch of times, but it's still kind of this like very, very high value tech part of the landscape. The people who work there are getting paid tech salaries. It's really sort of impacting the kind of suburban Boston environment. So we finally got a kind of a working version of our table together and did the kind of easiest thing, which is throw it into ArcGIS Online so we could start visualizing what we had. And, relative to the cartoon map, this is really boring. It doesn't tell us much, but for, kind of doing more GIS type work with it has been interesting. And we've done things like just, trying to figure out like how many different towns the different tech companies were in part because for those of us thinking about planning, right, like who actually has jurisdiction over something like a silicon fabrication plant, or some of these towns have like 2,000 people in them, and suddenly there's somebody building a $1.9 billion biotech facility, and you kind of go, well, who's responsible for that? So the map kind of helps us see some of those things. What I'm again really interested in is what buildings have been changed. So we added a data layer that again is sort of from assessor data, looking at just the parcels, but the parcel data has what year the building was built in on that particular site. So it allows us to go back and sort of say, okay, we know something like that RC automated system building was actually built sort of sometime after 1984, right? Versus some of these buildings that have been there since the 1950s, or something that was really rebuilt in the last couple of years. So it's been kind of a way of exploring the data, sort of kind of going through and taking that sort of historic, beautiful, rich map and making it into something less beautiful, but also hopefully kind of a jumping off point for some more research around the place that is Massachusetts and how it's changed and how it hasn't. So I'll just wrap up and kind of say what's next. And actually, I'd love to hear from you all about kind of, are there other maps you think we could be doing this with? Are there other sources of information or stuff we could be doing? One of the things I really want to do, I mentioned that RCA solid state facility. RCA actually sold that to Lockheed. A lot of the tech sector in Massachusetts is actually defense contracting. Raytheon's still there. And Lockheed eventually sold it to Sun Systems, if you guys remember Sun Microsystems, which then became Oracle. So Oracle is still there, but it is part of what we call Toxicchusetts. So we're looking at other maps. So this is from the report that Lockheed had to do about all the toxic waste that had leaked into the drinking water underneath what is now the Oracle facility in Massachusetts, let alone all of the like homes, multi-million-dollar homes that are around that, that tech workers are living in. So the map on the you all's left is Superfund sites, which are not all from tech necessarily, but Massachusetts is one of the largest concentrations of Superfund sites. If anybody wants to guess, the other one is actually Silicon Valley. So there's a lot of different other types of data that we can then start to layer on top and think about how what's visible in the landscape, what can we map, what can we not map, and those kinds of things. So that's where we're going with all this. I will end by just saying thank you and really look forward to questions. Find us on the internet, Slack, all those things. Happy Halloween. Anybody seen an analogic sign recently? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so the question is sort of thinking about, once we had the GIS together, are there other layers we could have added to sort of see something about like income data and the tech areas? Yeah, absolutely. And some of it's sort of just trying to figure out how to get that historical data, but we haven't gotten that far yet. But I think that's a definitely a great idea, because I'd love to see how the incomes have changed, and also honestly, data around race and ethnicity would be really interesting, because a lot of the tech work was sort of low paid work that became high skill. Great, thank you.